It's finally time to break down my favorite fight ever. A calculated slugfest between two boxing geniuses. The knockout artists Rocky Marciano and Archie Moore. The light heavyweight champion, the old mongoose, would take on the heavyweight champion, the Brockton blockbuster, in what was, at the time, one of the biggest fights ever. With over 100 million people around the world eagerly listening in on their radios. The event would not disappoint, due to the sheer pugilistic quality and uniqueness of both legendary gladiators. Archie Moore would one day end his career having knocked out 132 men. Yet he didn't hit all that hard. Instead, he was impeccable at setting traps with his beautiful crossguard style, utilizing an insane defensive system he would later teach to Big George Foreman. Moore was all forearms, elbows, and fists. Folding his arms meant he required special angles and preparations to set up punches. But he had the boxing knowledge to execute those angles perfectly. The upside was that the guard made it easy to reinforce his defense. Plus, he didn't need to retract his punches. He could follow right through into his cross-armed position. These factors let him throw with less risk, meaning that what seemed like an overprotective defense was actually allowing him to be far more aggressive than most. He would add in rolls and head movement to his fortified guard, then come back with accurate hands to clock the opponent with a perfectly timed counter. At close range, he could press in tight and use his folded arms to smother his opponent's punches. Then, once he had control, he would frame or trap with one arm and punish opponents with the other. While Moore's KOs were likely to come from carefully laid traps, Marciano was more an opportunist. His simplistic theory was, the more punches you throw, the more chance you have of winning a fight. Fighting from a crouch, he would apply insane amounts of pressure with his endless cardio, then find the perfect angle through wily head movement and footwork. At the time, many pugilistic enthusiasts consider him awkward. One sports writer describing him as a primitive exhibition of unscientific fighting, a cross between gladiator tactics in a Roman circus and the life and death battle of a Neanderthal man defending his cave. Maybe he wasn't technically correct, but he was effectively correct. Most equate having endless cardio with measured punches, but Marciano threw his whole body into every punch, like he learned boxing from reading comic books. But he stayed defensive by weaving in and out of his blows in a kind of brutal fluidity. His excellent book on boxing will prove to any doubters that what looked sloppy to the uneducated was actually a collection of refined old-school tactics. A scholarly brawler, Rocky rolled like a slick defensive master, then threw like he was holding a brick. Going into the fight, the decks should have been stacked against Moore, who was 41 at the time, nearly 10 years older than his rival. But Moore was used to being the underdog. He had to wait 7 years for a shot at the light heavyweight title, which he attributed to the mafia knowing he was an honest man. Now, he had worked his way up the heavyweight rankings to become #1 contender, waging an unprecedented campaign to get the fight that included making a wanted poster of Marciano with himself as the sheriff. So you can see how the public was ravenous to find out what would happen when these two iconic personalities clashed in the ring. Moore's plan was to beat Marciano with superior timing as Rocky tried to close distance. He even had a live band play music in preparation so he could practice his rhythm, explaining that rhythm is an important part of fighting. Have you ever gone out and danced all night and come home and you weren't tired? Why? Because that rhythm gets mixed into you. But Rocky was no stranger to adversity either. He had fought around 15 times a year to get where he was, explaining that back then we had fights to learn how to fight. His response to gassing out one time in a fight was to start running 8 miles every morning. It wasn't in either of these men to give an inch. And quit was the dirtiest of curse words. The sport was different than it was today, and the trash talking consisted of Moore saying, "I do expect to win. Why should I feel any other way?" And Marciano responding, "He still has to prove it to me. I do understand that he is a confident man, but I guess all my challengers have been that way also. But Rocky would soon find out exactly why the old mongoose was so confident. The bell bellowed out, and the 61,000 fans in Yankee Stadium roared and cheered the opening volley. Moore pressed in close and secured an underhook to tilt Marciano, hoping to overpower the smaller man with wrestling. But grappling was no weakness of Marciano's. His shorter arms, the shortest of any heavyweight in history, gave him a unique advantage, room to operate with surgical precision, even if his instruments were blunt. Moore's next attempt to gain control, an overhook, also failed. Instead, it was Rocky who was able to use his free hand to sneak in body shots. Moore's first idea for a strategy was bunk. Yet Rocky's tremendous power punching wasn't faring much better. Moore's guard was uniquely tailored to deal with looping punches, and Marciano's punches were crashing into a stone wall. Now Rocky did love to beat and bruise up his opponent's arms, putting hairline cracks in their guard, weakening their punches. But this time, his fists were slamming into elbows and forearms. To make matters worse for the blockbuster, Archie's rising jab was denying him the outside crouch he preferred while closing distance. He would duck and low, and Moore's fist would be there coming up to meet him. All in all, the first round had been far from a feel-out round. But despite that, it had given little momentum to either of the two intelligent warriors. Moore decided to change it up. He maintained long range in the second, and this paid off in a big way. Rocky threw out a hook, fast as a cobra's bite, but the mongoose rolled and faded back. Then, with a quick snap, his fist bit into the champion's temple. In only the second round, Marciano went down. Blackness cloaked his vision, and his consciousness slipped away, but only for a moment. His head cleared, and he rose to his feet, though he was having trouble seeing out of his left eye. Pressure fighters, and sluggers especially, are notoriously bad at surviving once they're hurt. But Rocky played it just right. He knew he had the advantage fighting close, so he found safety on the inside. But Moore demanded space with jarring uppercuts and up jabs. The Brockton blockbuster took a few hard shots, but he survived, with seemingly little damage, which was good news if you were a Rocky fan, because he still had 13 more rounds to go. In the corner, Rocky's team told him to go out and crowd more. This would be easier said than done, but also, Marciano was plain tired of being called crude. He had hoped to outbox the clever Moore, proving to the world that he was just as smart as the man some called a boxing professor. And so, he kept trying to outsmart Moore into the third. Rocky could definitely employ a quick dip as bait to get opponents to punch down, pulling and countering with a hard right, or slipping and coming back with a leaping hook. But Moore was gobbling up this bait and escaping the hook. Since Moore knew what Rocky was trying for, he could punch past the trap to Rocky's actual line of safety, connecting with stiff jabs, uppercuts, and crosses. So The Rock added in some tricky footwork, getting Moore to react to an uppercut, then sidestepping into an overhand. Here he had some success. But as the round closed, the jury was out. If Rocky hoped to beat Moore, he could not fight him on his own turf. So rather than struggle at a losing battle, Marciano decided to engage where he'd been winning, up close and personal. In the third, he tried to bait Archie by dipping 31 times, which got him hit 17 times. That stopped in the fourth. He instead jabbed right in, relying on his opposite hand to catch Moore's jabs. Sometimes he got hit, sometimes he didn't, But either way, he closed the distance, and once there, he went to work. But astonishingly, Moore welcomed this renewed barrage of punches. He had been counting on this. He hoped to use his crossguard to absorb the blows and ultimately tire the younger man. But Rocky had always held that it was more tiring to block a punch than it was to throw one. The crowd would soon see who was proven right. Rocky weaved and rolled, dipped and ducked, caught and threw right back. An out-of-control train going downhill. He was only picking up speed. Sports Illustrated once compared him to a hydraulic drill attacking a boulder. And never was this more true than now. Cracks were forming in Archie's seemingly impenetrable guard. Rocky pounding on the fault lines. If Moore was hoping to tire Marciano, it would not happen anytime soon. So in the fifth, it was Moore's turn to change up his strategy. Rather than try to tire his foe out by absorbing blows on his crossguard, he went back to keeping at long range with smart jabs and counters. His ability to stay safe at a distance was due to what Moore called his theory of escapology. Once extrapolating, I try to build a bridge. With each punch, I try to build a bridge so I can escape over it if something goes wrong. That's what you call escapology. That's what I call escapology. Rear uppercuts had pestered Rocky throughout the fight, and that definitely wasn't changing this round. Moore dialing them in to counter Rocky's overcommitted crosses. But Marciano found something too. A half hook, half uppercut that wedged right in between Archie's shoulder and arm. With his crossguard, Moore could block wide hooks with precision, but the short 45s were sneaking in. Once again, it was a very hard round to call, but soon something decisive would happen to completely change the course of the fight. At first, it seemed both fighters would continue down the same pathway, with Rocky taking double jabs and eating one spectacularly hard uppercut. Yet, still managing to slip his angled hooks through. In fact, these short hooks soon made it very difficult for Moore to hold on to his preferred range, and he had to backpedal to keep distance. The Rock pressed forward. No one was entirely sure he even knew how to move backwards. Moore was a fraction of a second too slow to stay out of range, and faster than lightning, Rocky hammered a thunderous right over his shoulder roll, arcing down to slam into his chin. It was the old Mongoose's turn to fall to the canvas. Moore somehow got up, but Rocky was on him right away, unstoppable as a machine, like someone had poured jet fuel into a bulldozer. But Moore expertly shelled up and punched with Rocky, getting inside to land a hard right, then rolling to counter with another one. Rocky didn't seem to notice. Even as Moore added hooks and jabs into the mix, he punched like an Olympic rower, with a steady, unbreakable pace. After 18 attempted punches, Marciano finally got through with the right. But now, it was Moore who didn't skip a beat. But Rocky's signature Susie Q landed yet again, and he followed up with a tight uppercut when Moore tried to press him close. Moore had to change up again, forced to become completely defensive, rolling to weather the landslide of boulders pounding down on him. But timidity just wasn't in his nature, and the KO artist shot precision rights that thudded into their target. Rocky just threw even faster. Archie could only outrun an avalanche for so long. His shoulder roll counters were proving to be his greatest strength, but also his greatest weakness. A looping right cleared his shoulder and sent him down for a second time in the sixth. But again, the aged fighter rose to his feet, refusing to give up on his most cherished dream. There was little time remaining in the round, but rather than weather the storm, Moore stood out in the hail and raged at it, pumping rights into Rocky's chin until the bell halted the action. Though the momentum had turned, the old mongoose had survived through craft and sheer willpower. To make things worse for Moore, his right eye was starting to close, prompting the ring physician to check on him in the corner. But Moore fought the same way he lived his life. He was nowhere near quitting, and was looking to prove he was still in the fight. Ironically, Archie's plan to tire Marciano had played out, only not through the intended method. Confident of a finish, The Rock had worn himself out. And it wasn't unthinkable that the sharp counters Archie landed had also done some lasting damage. Marciano now huffed air. His pace slowed, taking punch after punch. He was sometimes halted in his tracks, or even staggered back. The champion had never been more hittable in his entire career. Moore worked off his jab with expert skill, disrupting Marciano's rhythm to set up every power punch in the book. His perfect timing and rhythm was on full display as he beat Rocky's head like a drum. Marciano correctly calculated that backing up would just make things worse. If he hoped to break through Moore's stronghold, he would have to tread uphill under fire and let the bullets land where they would. After Rocky took 23 unanswered punches and missed 35 out of 37, his luck suddenly changed for the better. Moore went down again, this time from a slip. That's how the ref called it, but Rocky clearly didn't buy it. Seeing his elusive competitor on the floor seemed to revitalize him, like a shark smelling blood. Now far from treading water, a second wind set his punches sailing into Moore's impenetrable hull. Archie ended the round with his back against the ropes. His frustration on full display. He was landing and defending well, but it seemed that against this opponent, that didn't matter. And while both men were taking considerable damage, one of those men was 10 years older. He realized he would have to go for broke. He could tell Marciano was getting over eager to take him out. If he could use that against him, act like he was running scared, then just maybe he could drive him into another decisive punch like he had in the second. Like all of his other mid-fight adjustments up to this point, Moore's plan bore fruit immediately, his expert timing confounding the Brockton blockbuster. Hard left hooks and rear straights greeted Rocky each time he stepped into range. But just like every other time, Rocky was able to respond in kind. Moore's shots started to lose their way, and Rocky's were finding home. Moore would later explain, "Fighting Rocky Marciano is like fighting an airplane propeller. The blades keep whirling past your ear and over your head. By the 8th, I knew I had to do something drastic, and I figured I could get that right hand in. But he kept changing the speed and rhythm of his propellers. That threw me off." It was Rocky's fantastic offbeat, broken timing that made the difference. So again in the 8th, Moore went down, his face emoting not fear or anger, but exasperation. After decades in the ring, he had climbed to the very apex of boxing, persevered through every unfair obstacle, and then faltered at the final step. Moore was saved by the bell. When the ref asked if he wanted to continue, Moore told him that this was a championship fight, and so he would be counted out. So it was that Moore came out one last time and gave Rocky a few parting gifts to remember him by. Then he was overwhelmed by the most relentless pressure-punching powerhouse in heavyweight history. Afterwards, Rocky strolled over to tell Moore he was the best he had ever fought. Moore just threw back, "Man, you're all right." For me, this fight has a bittersweet ending, because I can't help thinking about how Moore's career would have gone if he'd been given the chances he deserved to get, and had gotten a shot at the championship when he was a much younger man. Something I didn't mention was that Moore had to temporarily stop training for this fight due to heart issues during camp, although I only heard it in one documentary and couldn't track down a source, so I'm not sure if it's true. Regardless, a younger Moore very well might have pulled off the impossible against the great Rocky Marciano. I still stand in awe of the absolute heart and commitment of both of these warriors, who gave all they had to the art of boxing. Moore would keep fighting and winning for years to come. Rocky would retire undefeated, a potent reminder to always throw in the towel when you have your health and you're still on top. And so, for the last time. This has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.